He wasn't looking at my brother. He wasn't looking at my father. He was looking at me. And I watched my father's face go completely white. I need to back up. My name is Serena Ashford. I'm 34 years old, and I've spent the last 11 years of my life as a trauma nurse. First at a Level 1 trauma center in Baltimore, then embedded with a civilian surgical team supporting military operations overseas, and now as a charge nurse at Mercy General in Charlotte, North Carolina. I've held pressure on wounds that would make most people faint. I've called time of death on people younger than me. I've worked 36-hour shifts and driven home on autopilot and cried in my car in the parking garage because there was nowhere else to do it. None of that ever impressed my father. What impressed my father was a title, a corner office, a certain kind of last name attached to a certain kind of salary. My father, Thomas Ashford, had built his career in commercial real estate, and he measured every human being he met by how they ranked on a scale only he could see. Doctors ranked high. Lawyers ranked high. Nurses, in his words, spoken more than once at the dinner table when I was 18 and had just announced my plans. Nurses were support staff. "You're smart enough to go to medical school," he told me that night. "I don't understand why you'd settle." I didn't argue. I never argued with my father. I had learned early that arguing with him was like arguing with a wall that could also make you feel ashamed of yourself. My older brother Daniel never had that problem. Daniel did everything right by our father's accounting. He went to UNC Chapel Hill, got his MBA, married a woman named Christina whose family owned 3 car dealerships in the Piedmont area, and now ran a commercial property development firm in Raleigh. He was 37, coached his son's little league team on weekends, and had the kind of easy confidence that comes from having never once been made to feel like an afterthought in your own home. I loved my brother. I want to be clear about that. Daniel wasn't cruel. He wasn't the one who made me feel small. He never pushed back either. Never once said to our father, "That's not fair to Serena." He'd look at his plate or change the subject, and I understood that he had his own relationship with our father to protect. I understood it. I just also never forgot it. My mother, Ruth Ashford, was kinder. She used to fold my scrubs fresh out of the dryer and leave them on my bed when I visited home, and she'd squeeze my hand at dinner when my father said something that landed wrong. But she never contradicted him out loud. She'd been married to him for 4 years. She knew what that cost. So that was the landscape. That was the family I came from. The dinner that changed everything was not my idea. It was August, a Saturday, brutally hot the way Charlotte gets in August, where the air feels thick and personal. Daniel and Christina were throwing an engagement party. Not for themselves, they'd been married 8 years, but for Christina's younger sister, Paige, who had just gotten engaged to a man named Oliver Webb. Oliver was finishing his residency in orthopedic surgery at Duke. My father had practically vibrated with excitement when he heard the words orthopedic surgery and Duke in the same sentence. The party was at a private room in a restaurant called Hargrove & Sons downtown, the kind of place with a wine list that's also a small novel, and where the lighting is specifically designed to make everyone look like they've just returned from a very successful vacation. I'd been told more than once that this was an important evening. My father called me the week before to go over it. "Christina's family will all be there," he said, "the Holloways. And Dr. Francis Holloway is bringing a colleague, a Dr. Emmett Grayson. He's the chief of surgery at Duke Medical Center. I want tonight to go smoothly. I'll be on my best behavior, Dad. I just mean," he paused, "don't bring up your hospital stories. People don't want to hear about injuries at a dinner party." I held the phone for a moment. "Okay, and wear something nice. The blue dress, if you still have it." I still had it. I drove to Charlotte from my apartment in Concord, about 20 minutes north, with the windows down because my AC had been making a noise I hadn't yet found time to get checked. I wore the blue dress. I had my hair up. I'd worked a 12-hour shift 2 days before, and my feet still ached in the way that becomes background noise after a few years, something you stop registering the same way you stop registering the hum of a refrigerator. When I arrived, the private room was already half full. Paige and Oliver were holding court near the window, both of them glowing the way newly engaged people glow, the way that makes you simultaneously happy for them and quietly aware of your own singleness. Christina hugged me at the door. Daniel shook my hand and then pulled me in for a hug, which was his way of apologizing for things he couldn't say out loud. My father was at the bar. He had a glass of bourbon and was deep in conversation with a man I didn't recognize, late 60s, silver-haired, the particular erect posture of someone who had spent decades being told his posture mattered. My father was laughing at something the man had said, the loud social laugh he used when he was working to impress someone. My mother found me first. "You look beautiful," she said and kissed my cheek. Who's Dad talking to? She glanced over. Oh, that's Dr. Grayson, the chief of surgery from Duke. He's Francis Holloway's mentor, apparently. Your father has been over there for 20 minutes. I nodded and took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. I wasn't drinking that night. I had an early shift the next morning and I'd learned years ago that 2 glasses of anything and a 5 a.m. alarm were a combination I regretted. The room filled. The noise level rose. I found a spot near the window and talked to Paige for a while about the wedding plans. They were thinking spring, maybe the botanical gardens in Raleigh, and I genuinely liked her, had always liked her. She had a warmth that her older sister had in smaller doses. Oliver came over and introduced himself, and he was exactly what you'd expect from someone finishing an orthopedic residency at Duke. Smart, slightly exhausted behind the eyes, very good at seeming present. We were 20 minutes from sitting down to dinner when the door to the private room opened and a man walked in. He was in his early 70s, I'd guess, with close cropped white hair and the kind of face that had been weathered by something more than just age. He wore a dark blazer over a simple button-down, and he moved through the room the way certain people move through rooms. Not commanding attention, exactly, but drawing it anyway, the way a still point draws your eye in a busy painting. He was with a woman about his age, elegant, with silver earrings and a quiet smile. I recognized him before he saw me. His name was Dr. James Calloway. Not a surgeon. Well, he had been once. He'd spent 15 years as a trauma surgeon with the Navy before transitioning to civilian medicine, and for the past decade he'd been the director of emergency surgical services at Johns Hopkins. He was also, quietly, one of the people who had built the protocols that civilian surgical teams like mine used when we were working in austere environments overseas. His work was in our training manuals. I had followed his protocols more times than I could count. I had met him once. 3 years ago at a medical conference in Washington, D.C., where I'd been part of a small panel on civilian-military surgical cooperation. He'd been in the audience. After the panel he'd come up to me, not to the doctors on the panel, to me, and told me that the approach our team had taken with damage control resuscitation was exactly what the field needed. He'd shaken my hand and said he'd looked up my team's outcomes data and was genuinely impressed. It was one of the 3 or 4 moments in my career I kept folded up somewhere quiet inside me for the bad days. I had no idea he would be here tonight. I hadn't seen his name anywhere. Later I would find out that he and Francis Holloway had trained together at Johns Hopkins 30 years ago and remained close friends. He was here as a personal guest, but I didn't know any of that yet. I was just standing by the window with a glass of sparkling water when he walked in, and I felt something shift in my chest. The particular feeling of seeing someone who has mattered to your work in a room where your work doesn't exist. I didn't go over to him. It wasn't my place. He was a guest like anyone else, and I wasn't going to perform my credentials at a family engagement party. My father, however, noticed him almost immediately. He drifted toward Francis Holloway with the radar of a man who could identify professional rank from across a room, and I watched him learn, presumably, who Dr. Calloway was. Because his posture shifted, the particular shift I'd been watching my whole life. The one that meant he was recalculating the importance of everyone present. 10 minutes later, my father came to find me. "Did you know James Calloway was going to be here?" he asked. I didn't know. Francis says he's one of the most respected trauma surgeons on the East Coast, director of surgical services at Hopkins. He said it the way you'd say a number you were proud of. I know who he is, Dad. My father looked at me in a way that meant he hadn't really registered what I said. This is a good room tonight, Serena. I want you to just enjoy the evening. Let the people who have things to talk about do the talking. I looked at him. I just mean there are a lot of accomplished people here tonight, and I don't want anyone to feel like they have to be polite. He patted my shoulder and walked away. I stood there for a moment. The old familiar feeling, the one that lived somewhere between hurt and exhaustion, settled in like weather. We sat down for dinner. I was placed between my mother and a cousin of Christina's who worked in insurance and was earnest and nice, and asked me 3 questions about nursing before pivoting to a long story about a fishing trip. I didn't mind. I was used to people not knowing what to do with my job at dinner parties. Most people had a single image of what nursing looked like: bedpans and blood pressure cuffs and doctors barking orders. And it was easier to let them keep it than to try to explain what 11 years in trauma actually meant. Dr. Calloway was seated near the head of the table, close to Francis Holloway and my father. My father was on his 4th bourbon. I could tell by the way he was sitting, slightly too comfortable, slightly too loud, the laugh coming a beat faster than it should. The first courses came out. Conversation moved around the table in the way dinner party conversation does, overlapping and splitting and reconnecting. Oliver talked about his residency. Paige showed her ring to someone who hadn't seen it yet. My brother told a story about a property deal that had almost gone sideways. I was cutting into a piece of salmon when my father's voice rose above the general noise of the table. "Serena is he said, and paused, and then laughed in a way that was meant to sound self-deprecating. "She's the one we can never figure out. Smart as a whip, could have done anything, ended up a nurse." He said it with a smile. He always did. The smile was the weapon. It made the words seem like affection when they weren't. A few people looked at me. My mother put her fork down very carefully. "That's wonderful," said someone. I think it was Oliver's mother, a woman named Beverly. "Nursing is such important work." "Oh, absolutely," my father said immediately. "Don't get me wrong. It's just with her scores, with her mind." He shrugged. "I always said she could have been a doctor, Dad." Daniel said it quietly. My father waved his hand as if swatting a fly. "I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying, she had options." He looked down the table at me, and I think he genuinely believed what he was doing was a form of love. That was the part I could never fully resolve. Serena's always done things her own way. I smiled. I had perfected a smile for exactly this situation. Pleasant, light, giving away nothing. I had learned it when I was about 16, and I had used it so many times it came automatically now, like muscle memory. I was about to say something neutral and redirect the conversation when I heard the sound of a chair shifting. Dr. Calloway had put down his napkin. He wasn't looking at my father. He wasn't looking at the table. He was looking at me with the direct, quiet focus of someone who has spent decades making fast assessments and has just made one. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice was calm and unhurried and cut through the table noise cleanly. "I don't think we've been formally introduced tonight. You're Serena Ashford." It wasn't a question. My father's face was doing something I had never seen it do before. It was recalibrating in real time, the way a machine does when it receives unexpected input. "I am," I said, "James Calloway." He leaned forward slightly. "We met in Washington, the Civilian Military Surgical Cooperation Panel 3 years ago. I remember your team's outcomes from the austere environment work. I cited those in a paper I published last spring. I should have sent you a note." I meant to. He said it simply, without performance. "You were doing damage control resuscitation at a level most people with twice your resources couldn't manage." The table had gone quiet, not dramatically, not the movie kind of quiet, but the particular hush that falls when people realize the conversation has shifted into a different register. "Thank you," I said. "That work, it was a team effort. The surgeons we partnered with were exceptional. The protocols were yours." He said it with the finality of someone correcting a record. I read the documentation. The nursing coordination was what held those cases together. My father had not moved. His bourbon glass was in his hand and he had not moved. "How long were you embedded overseas?" Dr. Calloway asked. 2 separate deployments. 18 months total, between 2019 and 2022. He nodded. Then he looked down the table. Not at my father specifically, not pointed, just a general look, and said, conversationally, "Trauma nurses at that level are among the most skilled clinicians in medicine. People don't understand how much autonomy the work requires. The decision-making in the field." He shook his head slightly. "Most people don't have the stomach for it. The ones who do well are exceptional." He picked up his fork. He said it the way you'd say something that simply needed to be on the record. Then he turned to say something to Francis Holloway and the table noise resumed. I looked at my plate, my salmon. The little sprig of something green beside it. My mother had her hand on my forearm under the table. She squeezed once quickly and let go. I glanced up at my father. He was looking at me in a way I had not seen from him in 34 years. There was something in it that I didn't have a name for. Not quite shame, not quite pride. Something in the space between the two where parents sometimes end up when they realize the story they've been telling themselves about their children isn't the true one. He set his bourbon down. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say, really. Everything that needed saying had been said, and none of it had come from me. The rest of the dinner passed the way the rest of dinners do. Dessert came out, a chocolate thing with raspberry sauce that was very good. People made toasts to Paige and Oliver. Paige cried a little, the happy kind. The wine kept moving. Before the evening broke up, Dr. Calloway found me near the coat rack by the exit. His wife was talking to Beverly Webb a few feet away. "I wasn't being polite in there," he said without preamble. "I meant it." "I know," I said. "Thank you." He studied me for a moment. "Are you still doing the austere environment work?" "I came home 2 years ago. I'm charge nurse at Mercy General in Charlotte, now Good Hospital." He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and produced a card. Cream-colored, simple, just his name and a phone number. I'm putting together an advisory group. Civilian clinicians with field experience who can help shape the next round of trauma protocols. I'd like you to be part of it if you're interested. I took the card. I'm interested, I said. He nodded once, like that was the answer he expected, and went to collect his wife. My father found me in the parking garage. I was unlocking my car. The AC was still making that noise. I noticed it immediately when I started the engine to check, still not fixed, when I heard his footsteps on the concrete behind me. Serena, I turned. He looked older in the garage light, which is what fluorescent light does. It strips everything away and leaves you with what's actually there. He had his hands in his jacket pockets, and he was looking at me with the expression I'd seen at the table, the one I didn't have a name for. I didn't know, he said. About the work you'd done. The overseas deployments. The protocol. I didn't. Your mother and I, we knew you went, but we didn't understand what it. He stopped. He wasn't a man who handled incomplete sentences well. I know you didn't, I said, and I meant it without bitterness. I had made choices over the years to protect the part of my work that mattered to me from his particular kind of scrutiny. I hadn't exactly hidden things, but I hadn't fought to make him see either. That was on both of us. I'm proud of you, he said. It came out stiffly, the way things do when they haven't been used in a while. I looked at him for a long moment. There was a version of me, the 18-year-old who sat at the dinner table and heard the word settle, who wanted to say something, wanted to lay it all out. 11 years, the night shifts, the patients who didn't make it, the ones who did, the years I spent developing skills that saved lives in places where nothing else could. I wanted him to understand the weight of what he'd dismissed, but I didn't say any of that. Not because I was afraid of him, not anymore. But because I was 34 years old and I understood something I hadn't at 18. You cannot argue someone into valuing what they couldn't see. And tonight, finally, someone had helped him see it. That was enough. That would have to be. Thank you, Dad, I said. He nodded. He looked like he might say something else, but he didn't. He turned and walked back toward the elevator. I sat in my car for a few minutes before I drove. The parking garage was quiet except for distant traffic and the faint echo of other people's footsteps somewhere above. I sat with the engine idling and the weird noise from the AC, and I thought about Dr. Calloway's card in my coat pocket and the look on my father's face and the hand my mother had put on my arm under the table. 11 years. I thought about the first patient I ever lost. A man named Dennis, 42 years old, 3 kids, a motorcycle accident, and nothing we could do was enough. I thought about the day overseas when we ran a 6-hour surgery with the last of our blood product supply and everyone in that tent knew it and nobody said so out loud. I thought about driving home from shifts at 7 a.m. with the windows down in February, because the cold was the only thing keeping me awake. I thought about all the nights I had sat with something heavy that I couldn't put down anywhere. None of it had ever needed my father's approval to be real. I had known that for a long time. But sitting in that parking garage, I let myself feel it fully for the first time. The weight of it, and then the setting down of the weight. The way a door closes when you finally stop waiting for it to open. I put the car in reverse. I had an early shift. I had patients who needed me. I had a card in my pocket with a phone number on it and work ahead that mattered. That was enough. That had always been enough.